So today we're going to be looking at the daily inquiry question of why might empathy be important when studying history? And if you don't know what empathy is, that's perfectly fine because we're going to talk about it here in a moment. So you guys finished your due now, and we're going to get into our lesson, which is understanding empathy. And then today you're going to get an opportunity to kind of work independently, watching some videos, and then kind of doing your own analysis and summary. So one announcement. As a reminder, advisement starts this week during 7th or 8th period. So if you are unsure which one you have, you'll need to check your schedule in campus. If anything, your teachers may have already sent you invites to join the Google Classroom for your advisement. But if not, check your schedule, see who your teacher is, and maybe reach out to them if you have not received an invite. Communication. So with us having advisement starting this week, my hours for availability have changed slightly. You can still always email me, catch me on Google Chat. If you need to talk to me during class time about stuff you just don't want the rest of the class to see or hear, you can send me a message on chat. You can also catch me before or after school, Mondays through Thursdays before school. You can catch me white days, after school from 2 p.m. to 3:20. So if you are in advisement and you have questions about your grades, or you're not in advisement and you have questions, either way, you can reach out to me during this time. And then Fridays, I will have office hours from 11 a.m. to 1 p.m. And I'll have either a specific Google Meet for this, or I might have a Zoom. So I'll keep you posted on that as I figure out which direction I'm going to go. And then as always, classroom stream. I'm slowly getting caught up on stuff. I got some grades entered this weekend. I still have not made it to my webpage though. So just keep checking classroom stream and the agenda for any kind of updates. Any questions there? Okay, doesn't look like it. Thank you for your responses with the nods. Again, if you don't have nod, you can always download it, or you can just comment in the chat. So today's question was asking you, what do you think empathy is? And even if you don't know, you were able to look it up and just put it into your own words. If, as we get into our conversation, you find that it's not what you thought it was, you can always come back and edit your responses. So I don't want you to feel as if you can't learn and grow and adjust your answers accordingly. I'm going to go ahead and open up today's lesson. There are 2 documents in here. You are going to need this first one, the 03 Understanding Empathy. This is where you will complete your work in it today. And then for our discussion, I will be taking notes in this document, and you will be able to access and read through that one as we go. Or if you need to go back and review later. Okay. Sorry, just waiting for my screen to load. I know we've gone over these vocab terms a couple times, but I just wanted to kind of give us a refresher one more time before we go into empathy, because at the end of this lesson today, you are going to have to demonstrate both your understanding of culture, perspective, bias, and empathy in order to complete your assignment. So could somebody either share vocally or type it in the chat? What is the definition we agreed upon for culture? And if you want to go back and look at your old notes from previous days, you can do that. But I'll give you guys a minute to respond one way or another.
Wait, what do we have to do again?
Right now, I'm just wanting somebody to share with us the definition we agreed upon for culture. So what did we say culture was or is? Okay, Oscar, whoops, disappeared. Culture is where someone comes from and something that influences what they do every day. It can include food, lifestyle, history, and traditions of a group of people. Very cool. I like this. You guys, if you have not already, you can definitely just go into the chat, and I'm going to just copy and paste this for simplicity and time saving. Okay. Make that a little bit bigger. Okay, so culture is where someone comes from and something that influences what they do every day. What is a culture norm?
Culture norm is normality in a culture, like an expectation that isn't really said or written down for the culture.
Okay, cool. Thank you very much. Rule or expectation. Okay, very cool. Let's see, and then Oscar shared with us the rules of standards of a culture group that are done all the time, sometimes without thinking about it. Some culture norms include expectations about how a person acts or what clothing they wear. So you can definitely copy what Oscar shared with us in the chat. I'll also put this one in here to make it a little bit easier. And either of these definitions are good definitions for culture norm. Okay. And you should be filling in your boxes as we're going through these together. So make sure you opened up the correct document. Our next one, perspective. Lydia.
What is the document under?
So when we go into classwork, it is today's date, 9/8, and then lessons and assignment. And you want this one, the 03, understanding empathy.
Okay.
So what is a perspective? Lydia?
A perspective is a point of view from somebody.
Okay, so someone's point of view. Again, I like to think of this as the way they see the world. Drop this one in the chat. Okay. And then lastly, what did we say a bias is? If we have a bias, what does that mean? How about this? Our bias is always fair. No. No. Okay. So I've got some agreement on that, that biases are not always fair. So we could say, I think, when I think back to the video that we watched, that a bias was an inflexible belief about someone or something. So a bias could be something like a stereotype. Sometimes bias are very intentional based upon our experiences, and sometimes they're ingrained. So like when we keep hearing this word in the news and kind of with the riots and stuff that are going on right now, we keep hearing people talk about systemic racism. And so systemic racism is kind of a bias that has been so embedded into our system of how we do things in America that people don't even think about it. It just happens and they think it's normal. So inflexible bias or is an inflexible belief about someone or something. And even when we sometimes think that these are positive bias, usually they're always harmful because they're always taking away what makes us different, and it's not giving the individual the benefit of the doubt. It's just making them like everyone else who shares a similar characteristic. Okay, questions about these vocab terms? Are we good with them? Thumbs up or an okay in the chat?
What is bias again?
An inflexible belief about someone or something. So you can almost think of it sometimes like a stereotype, because that's where we sometimes see them. But it could be like favoring or not favoring someone or something without really thinking about it. You just kind of lean one direction rather than another. But I like the idea of that is an inflexible belief. And so then what happens is this belief ends up leading sometimes to a particular action based on that bias. Well, I think all old people are creepy, so I just avoid old people. So that's a bias. It's whenever you apply this belief to an entire group of people or to an entire thing.
Okay, thank you.
Yep. Okay, and I put that definition in the chat as well. If it's easier for you to copy and paste from there. If your typing skills are still need a little work. Okay, so I'm going to move on to empathy. What, if a couple of you could share, what is empathy? And you can put it in the chat, or you can put it, or you can share it vocally. All right, Oscar has shared, I think empathy is when you know what the other person is going through in hard times and to put yourself in the person's problem. Does anyone else have an example or a definition they'd like to share? Great. Man, I am having problems typing today. All right, Dayana's also shared with us. Empathy means to have the ability to understand and share the feelings of another person. I think both of these are great definitions of empathy. They really focus in on this idea of trying to relate to the other person and trying to share and feel what they're feeling. So empathy is not sympathy. What is sympathy?
I think sympathy is one like someone just making sure you're okay, like saying, "Hi, how are you?" Making sure you're feeling all right, but they're not putting themselves in your shoes.
Good. That's a good example. So they're kind of checking in on you. They might feel sorry for what you're going through, but at no point are they really trying to relate to what you are going through or trying to understand what you're going through. It's kind of here in America, we have a tendency to ask how people are doing. And then sometimes people really don't want to hear how they're doing. It's just, being polite. So that's kind of like sympathy is you're just checking on the person, but you're really not trying to get into and understand what they're going through. So we're going to watch a quick little video on empathy in order to maybe for those people who are a little bit more of a visual. And in this, there are 4 key steps to showing empathy. So if you can keep an eye out for those, and then we'll talk about them at the end of this video. Oh, okay.
So what is empathy, and why is it very different than sympathy? Empathy fuels connection. Sympathy drives disconnection. Empathy, it's very interesting. Teresa Wiseman is a nursing scholar who studied professions, very diverse professions where empathy is relevant, and came up with 4 qualities of empathy. Perspective taking, the ability to take the perspective of another person or recognize their perspective as their truth. Staying out of judgment, not easy when you enjoy it as much as most of us do. Recognizing emotion in other people and then communicating that. Empathy is feeling with people. And to me, I always think of empathy as this kind of sacred space when someone's kind of in a deep hole and they shout out from the bottom and they say, "I'm stuck, it's dark, I'm overwhelmed." And then we look and we say, "Hey, climb down. I know what it's like down here, and you're not alone." Sympathy is, "Ooh, it's bad, no, you want a sandwich?" Empathy is a choice, and it's a vulnerable choice, because in order to connect with you, I have to connect with something in myself that knows that feeling. Rarely, if ever, does an empathic response begin with "at least." And we do it all the time, because you know what? Someone just shared something with us that's incredibly painful, and we're trying to silver lining it. I don't think that's a verb, but I'm using it as one. We're trying to put the silver lining around it. So I had a miscarriage. Oh, at least you know you can get pregnant. I think my marriage is falling apart. At least you have a marriage. John's getting kicked out of school. At least Sarah is an A student. But one of the things we do sometimes in the face of very difficult conversations is we try to make things better. If I share something with you that's very difficult, I'd rather you say, "I don't even know what to say right now. I'm just so glad you told me." Because the truth is, rarely can a response make something better. What makes something better is connection.
Oops. Back.
So
Okay, got it to stop. So according to this video, what are 4 key steps into showing empathy? And you can give them to me in whatever order. Okay, well, we can visually, but when she talks about what does visually look like? Like, how can we show empathy for someone? What is one of the things that we could do? Well, let's go back to the 2 definitions that you guys gave us earlier. And the first step that she talked about in this video was this idea of perspective taking. So this is acknowledging how the person is feeling and trying to take their perspective into yourself. So this would literally be trying to put yourself in someone else's shoes. All right, so a couple things, try to make things better. So in trying to make things better, what did she tell us one thing that we need to not do, even though we all seem to do it without thinking sometimes? What do we need to not do when we're trying to be empathetic? Lydia?
We should not try to sympathize.
So not the sympathizing, but the what do we do sometimes when we see when somebody is in a certain situation and maybe we haven't put ourselves into their shoes yet.
Oh.
What do we do sometimes?
So, like, for example, like somebody says, I lost my dog today. And then somebody says, well, at least you had a dog.
Okay, so that was, so the whole sympathy thing there. And that trying to make it better, but really it's not making it better. But one thing kind of along those lines is to not judge. So we can't make a quick assessment just based on our feelings without putting ourselves in their shoes. So we can't just look at it and say, oh, well, maybe had you tied your dog up, it wouldn't have run away. Or maybe had you been nicer to your dog wouldn't have run away. When really that's not the case at all. So we need to be careful in knowing the difference between when we're trying to empathize rather than sympathize. We need to make sure that we're not starting with the at least and trying to, make it better that way, but rather just to say, recognize the emotion that they're feeling. And so that was the third one she talked about, was recognizing the emotion. Oops. And so Tommy gave us the fourth one about talking to them about how you're in the same place. And so when we recognize the emotion, this is wanting us to look inside ourselves for maybe a similar situation or maybe something similar that we can at least relate to where they're coming from emotionally. So maybe I didn't have a dog that ran away, but you know what, maybe I have lost something very valuable to me, or I've had somebody very valuable to me who has left sometimes without saying goodbye, and I don't know, it just left me feeling really sad and really heartbroken. So we may not be able to have that same experience, but we should be able to recognize what the person is saying and look for that emotion in ourselves, and then let them know that we recognize that emotion, that we communicate that understanding. We're talking to them about how, not so much us taking over the conversation and talking about our experience, but rather saying, wow, I understand where you're coming from. That can't be easy. And so I call this communicating. And so empathy in this aspect, just kind of talking about it in this way, it's easy for us to say, yes, I can put myself into someone else's shoes. But sometimes what we run into is either based on our culture or based on our culture norms, or maybe our perception and bias is it's a little bit harder for us to do that. And that's where this not judging really comes in, until we know more of the perspective, or maybe multiple perspectives, holding off and making any kind of assessment of the situation. And sometimes having to work through culture norms. A big culture norm that the world is having to work through and has been working through for a while now is looking at like gay marriages and LGBTQ. And there are some cultures which have culture norms that say that, no, this is not right, this is not okay. And then there are other cultures where people, based on their experiences of maybe knowing somebody who's gay or being gay, is trying to share why they are no different than anyone else. And so this is where we are going to start getting into looking at different reasons for people moving places, different reasons for people doing things, that we might have to sometimes look past our bias and maybe look past what our culture norms have taught us and really try to empathize and put ourselves in that person's shoes or those people's shoes to try and understand where they're coming from. That leads us into today's activity. So for today's activity, you are going to select 2 different videos from the options provided on the next 2 slides. For each video, you are going to demonstrate your understanding of culture, perspective, and bias by explaining how these elements were shown or displayed in the video. Then you are going to give an example of how you could display, oh man, I never fixed that typo. An example of how you could display Okay. You're going to give an example of how you could empathize for the person in the video. So what this is going to look like is on slides 6 and 7 are where you're going to do your work. These are all links to videos, and they are about different conversations. So this first slide is about conversations on race. And so these are just different conversations, anywhere from 5 to 7 minutes. You can watch one or multiple if you want. But when you have finished watching, what I'd like you to do is come over here, and you can use my sentence stems or you can delete them. But you're going to tell me one example you saw of culture. You're going to tell me an example of perspective. So maybe the person who was talking from the perspective of growing up Black, or maybe Latino or Asian American. So tell me whose perspective you're seeing in this. And then a bias that existed. And then with this last one, I could show I was empathetic to this person. Man, I got typos all over the place. I could show I was empathetic to this person's issue by, and so just give me an idea of what being empathetic would look like. Would it be an action? Would it be saying something specific? How can you show this person that you are really trying to understand where they are coming from and what they've experienced? On this last slide, the theme is focused on bias. And so these videos are going to take a closer look at the unfair effects of our subconscious and the unfair effects of bias. And so you're going to do the exact same thing, though, is you are going to talk about where you saw an example of culture. You're going to talk about perspective. You're going to talk about a bias that existed, because there is going to be a bias in all of these. And then how could you show empathy to this person's issue? So this is what you are going to work on today. Oh, whoops, where's my agenda? I closed it. So you're going to have, I'm going to give you guys about a half hour to work on this. I'm going to ask us to come back at 9:30. So if you need to drop off of the Meet in order to watch the video, you're more than welcome to drop off of Meet and take care of what you need to. But if you could please be back at 9:30 for us to kind of do a debrief. If you have questions, I will be here. So you are more than welcome to stay on the Meet if you want to. But you're going to finish slides 6 and 7. You'll have the next 30 minutes to work on it. So we'll come back together at 9:30. Lydia, did you have a question?